Converted man here, the burden of proof 101, because once again, we have to explain the burden of proof to people. Anyways. Alright, so CantStopTheMattWalsh posted this comment. Oh, the old burden of proof deflection. It's one of the atheists' favorite deflection tactics. Really? I mean, how do you know it's one of our favorite tactics? I mean, do you have like a list of our tactics and you've polled atheists to find out what our favorite tactic is or something? Nah, you don't. You're just saying that because it just sounds good to say. You don't know that. All right. The ironic thing is atheists do actually have the burden of proof. They do? Really? Oh, okay. How's that work? They will often claim that theists have the burden of proof because they are in the affirmative on the question of does God exist? Well, let's examine that for a moment, shall we? All right, so in regards to anything, whatever it is, if you say that the thing is or is not, if you make a claim of some sort, then you have the burden. So if you say there is a God, then you have the burden. If you say there is no God, you have the burden. Most theists say, yes, there is a God, rather than I believe in God. If they say I believe in God, they have no burden. They do not need to demonstrate anything to anybody. Vice versa, if you say I do not believe in God, you have no burden to prove that. You do not need to prove anything because belief statements do not have the burden of proof. One might be wondering why somebody believes or doesn't believe in something, but you don't have any logical reason to have to demonstrate that position. I just believe it, that's it. So if you say President Trump ordered a nuclear launch, you need to prove that this is true. If you say that you believe that this happened, you don't need to prove that it did happen because you just believe it. Okay? Not that hard. So, broadly speaking, and usually speaking, theists do have the burden because they do say that God is real rather than saying, I believe in God, or I'm not sure if God is real, but I still believe in it. This would be kind of a agnostic theist position, or also known as weak theistic position. They state that since the theist answers yes, the theist has a burden of proof. Correct. If you say there is a God or there is a chicken that crossed the road or whatever you say, you have the burden to prove that statement. If you make a claim about reality, you need to demonstrate that that claim is true in some way, shape, or form, unless you don't care if people believe you. If you don't care, okay, fine. I have no reason to believe you. Anyone can just say anything. You need to demonstrate that the thing is true. And if you're not willing or able to do so, then I don't believe you. I'm going to be a skeptic about what you said, and you can go about your way. The problem is the atheist is simultaneously answering the question of, is God non-existent with a yes? No, they are not. By and large, atheists have asserted continuously and constantly that atheism is seen to them to be the idea that I do not believe in God is the statement being made by the atheist. I am taking a stance of non-belief, and this is a position of burden holding. I do not believe X is correct. That's it. And by and large, atheists have decided, the zeitgeist, if you will, of atheism has become, I don't believe in God. This has even become to the point where dictionaries have added this as a definition to atheism. At one point, classically, atheist was the assertion that there was no God. But at some point, people started saying, no, what I mean by atheist is this other thing, and it became popular enough that that's now what the word means, because words change over time. The way that we use words changes over time, and words, of course, change from culture to culture. So the word faggot or fag, for example, was used at one point in time for the word cigarette, and in, I believe, France and Britain, it's still used. Can I bum a fag? Can I borrow a cigarette? But in America, the word fag and faggot now refers derogatorily to somebody that is a homosexual. So the word has changed usages. It has changed over time. The word humbug was at one point a very bad swear word. Now we just see it as a silly expression used in that one story, A Christmas Carol, and nobody uses the word humbug in normal conversation. Words evolve and change over time, and it's important to note how the person and or group is using the word. If Christians keep telling you, hey, the way that Christianity is X, then the way that Christianity is X. There you go. You just accept that that's their definition of it. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe you don't agree with it. Maybe you wish it was something else. But that's how they're using the word, and you should accept that that's how they're using the word and assume that they're probably going to use that word that way moving forward. Now, it's okay to ask, hey, how do you use the word atheist? I just want to make sure, because I don't want to straw man you or whatever. Okay, fine, So they are taking an affirmative stance in the debate. No, again, in regards to God being non-existent, I do not make that claim. Most atheists do not. In fact, I do not. Now, there might be some atheists out there that does, but I do not know that person. I'm going to be doing a poll at some point here to find out how many atheists say what about atheism. So stay tuned for that. But at any rate, that's not my claim, so I don't have the burden of proof. The problem is they know their arguments don't have any merit. How do you know that we know this? How do you know that I know that my argument doesn't have any merit? This is a statement about the reality that is occurring in my brain. You do not know what's happening in my brain. You cannot assess what is going on in my head. You do not have access to this knowledge. This is a false claim that you are making about reality. So instead of trying to defend their argument with logic, reason, or critical thinking, they just presuppose their stance while demanding the theist cannot presuppose his. Wrong. Presupposition is logically broken. Nobody should preassume X. X should be something that we reason to, not reason from. You guys are the ones that sometimes use presuppositionalism, and in fact, I just hung up on a guy that used presupp yesterday. And moving forward, I will have nothing to do with anybody using presupp as a rule, because I don't deal with that. I like to engage in reality, and I like to engage in logic, and presupp doesn't do these things. I don't know whether there is or is not a God. I don't even necessarily know what God is. That is not my claim to make. I am not saying what God is or is not. That is the claim of the person who's saying that there is a God, because they have a type of God that they imagine to exist in their head. And by them saying, hey, there's a God, I go, really? That's interesting. Where is it? Is it over there behind that tree? Look at the trees. Oh, no, God is hiding. Oh, okay. How do you know God is hiding? See, it's not my burden. It's theirs. It's a wildly contradictory and childish approach to a debate. Well, it would be if it was true, but it's not. So, oh well. Atheists claim they want sufficient evidence for the theistic claim. Absolutely. I would love any evidence for the idea of God. Nobody has ever presented that. in all my years of doing this, not a single person has presented evidence. Everyone has presented an argument, but not evidence. These are different things. The atheist simultaneously acts as the attributor of what constitutes sufficient evidence. Well, sufficient evidence, perhaps that is a tricky thing to explore, but I would say my stance is that I require the same amount of evidence that I do for everything else. The evidence I have for my keyboard or my microphone or my screen or my computer or my stuffed lobster, the evidence that I have for these items is the same evidence that I should have for any other claim, whatever that claim is. And if you are unwilling and or unable to produce evidence like that, then I'd have to wonder what evidence you could hope to produce. Some sort of test, some sort of scientific experiment or something? That would be interesting. Show me that for God. If not, you don't have any evidence at all. Your arguments for God, whatever they might be, are not evident. And when we examine those arguments using logic, we find one or more logical or scientific flaws. The atheist is also completely incapable of defining what it even constitute as sufficient evidence. This is circular logic. No, that wouldn't be an example of circular logic. You don't appear to know what circular logic means. I just define what constituted as sufficient evidence. The same sort of evidence that I have for everything else. Empirical evidence, repeatable test. We have that for everything. Broadly speaking, there's only a few things that you couldn't have that for. You could only have arguments, and if you have only an argument, the argument has to be valid and sound. So these things tend to be objects of the mind. The number 1, 2, 3, etc. Musical notes, letters, words, concepts. These are things that exist in the mind and nowhere else. They do not exist in the same way that the stuffed lobster exists. They exist only as a byproduct of our creative imagination. They're very useful, and we use these ideas to talk about things. But if brain stopped, then the number 1 would stop. There would not be anybody to say the number 1 if there was nobody around. The number 1 doesn't exist out there in the universe. Now, people take that and they say that the number 1 is non-physical. And what that means is the category of the number 1 belongs in the mind. So if you find that the argument for God is one that regulates it to the category of an object of the mind, then God becomes an idea like the number 1, letters, musical notes, etc. And I agree, God is an idea that people have in their heads, but if you want to say that God is more than that, then you need to produce evidence for that. But the theist has not, and I don't think will ever produce that. Rather, they will produce arguments which we atheists do examine using logic, reason, and science. And every time we do, those arguments have failed so far, and so we expect that the next argument will probably fail as well. I have yet to be surprised at that. Now, what I do get surprised at, even though I've seen it happen every time, is that the theist, after being explained why their argument doesn't work and cannot function, refuses to accept that and doubles down on the argument anyway. This perplexes me. I don't understand why that happens, but the mind is weird and people have, brains that do all sorts of crazy things to them. I do know that because I experienced some of that myself. So, rather than complain about me not shouldering the burden of proof, just prove God. That's all. It's not that hard. Shouldn't be. Unless God is just a concept in the mind, then it will be very hard to do. So it depends on what you think God is. So my response was, I covered this many times. Guess I'll go live and cover it again. And well, that's what I did. And so I did it. And there you go. The end. Prove God if you want to. And if you don't, then don't bother. Another thing that this same person posted that I suppose is worth a mention, that he said that atheism doesn't allow for objective moral claims, and I had to correct him that atheism doesn't allow or disallow for anything, because it's not a worldview. It isn't a religion. It isn't a prescription. It's a description. There is no atheism other than atheism being a statement of either there is no God or that I don't believe in God. In either case, neither one of those positions allows or disallows for objective moral values. So it's a category error to make that statement. But he believes that this is true. And that's his belief. He's wrong, but, whatever. Anyways, so hopefully he'll just, show me God or whatever it is you want me to believe, and then I will. All right. Until next time, stay skeptical. And after next time, be skeptical. Wait, no, that's the other way around. Is how that's supposed to be.